Good morning, everybody. It's Wednesday, 11th of November here. It's Remembrance Day, so it's a great time to consider those that paid the ultimate price. And perhaps this year and every other year, we should also include healthcare workers in Remembrance Day. Just an idea. Today, I'm joined by Joe Burston, and we're going to be talking about the entrepreneurial mindset, how anyone can become fearless and grow. Before we get into it, just a brief bio on Joe for those that don't know Joe. So, very successful Australian entrepreneur, extremely passionate about diversity and inclusion. Founded 6 businesses, I think, Joe?
That's right.
Including Job Capital, which went from 0 to 40 million within a 5-year period. She's been is an advisor to the Prime Minister in the Cabinet Office on gender diversity. That led in recent years to an organisation called Rare Birds. Now, this business supports thousands of female entrepreneurs across Australia and Papua New Guinea, and also supports organisations now developing structured mentoring programs based around diversity and inclusion, and really giving everyone a fair chance, I suppose. Recently as well, Joe's launched a business called Startup Business that we're going to talk about. And this is around entrepreneurial learning in action programs for school-aged children in every state in Australia, working on what I believe, Joe, is one of your core beliefs. You can't be what you can't see.
Yes.
Cool. Would you mind sharing a bit around your, career backstory and how you came to doing what you're doing today? Because that'd be really.
Well, look, first I'd like to say thank you to you and Emily for inviting me to this session. And I'd also like to acknowledge that no matter where we are dialing in from today, we are on Aboriginal country. And I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians and their elders past, present and emerging. That's a really important part of how I operate in business. In 2006, I was managing director of a salary packaging company, which was probably about an $80 million business. I was getting a little bit restless. I'd asked the directors for some equity in the company because I wanted to continue to grow it, and they said no. Okay. That's a very short version. Yeah. I went to Melbourne to pitch to a particular client down there who had a headhunting business and quite a big group of other businesses. And you can see my little Dashie coming down the steps.
Yeah, it's cool.
And I happened to meet a serial entrepreneur. And when I had a conversation with him, sat in his office and had a look at how he was operating in business, it was very, very exciting for me. Yeah. The one question he asked was, if you were not, running the business that you are now, what would you do? And I said, well, actually, I'd probably be running my own business. And I pitched an idea to him. Now, just remember, this is a conversation that happened over about 3 hours, and it was supposed to be a 20-minute meeting. Yeah. So I pitched a business concept to him. I showed him the model, how it would make money and how it could scale. And 6 weeks later, he became my first investor, my mentor, and now a very good friend, and also my business partner. And that's Job Capital, and that's salary packaging. And, of course, we do a lot of visa work, 482 visa work and visa work in general for people coming to Australia or moving around the country in specialised roles. So that business was my very first. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I had an amazing mentor, an amazing business partner in my corner who had run many, many companies, who built them from nothing, who had done mergers and acquisitions, who had listed businesses, who had sat on it as a non-executive director of many listed companies as well, and sold businesses. So I had, the Muhammad Ali of entrepreneurs in my corner, and with that tool in my belt, that gave me the confidence to believe I had everything I needed to grow that business. And of course I did, and I had a lot of glass on the way, I made a lot of mistakes on the way. But it became a $40 million business in the first 5 years of its life. And it was pretty crazy times. I had a mindset that was very interesting, which I can share with you later. Yeah, great. I had that company for, I still have it. It's now nearly 15 years old, but I had that company for a while, and I started to get a little bit restless, and it's a very transactional business. I have a great crew running it. I'm not very hands-on in the business anymore, which is a great place to be at this stage of my life. But I wanted to have more purpose in what I was doing. And, I won in 2012, I won the PSC Foundation Award for my contribution to technology mid-career and my contribution to community. And if anyone knows Trevor Pearcey, he was the founder of computers in Australia. He was the first person to build a mainframe computer in Australia. He was also the first person globally to make music come out of a computer. And a lot of people don't know that happened in Australia. Wow. So I won this award. I'm standing on stage in Parliament House in New South Wales, and I'm looking out, and there's politicians and academics and industry leaders and captains of all kinds. And there was not many women in the room. And I thought, wow, where are all the women in technology, and where are all the women who are entrepreneurs in technology? So I went off to my old high school and my old primary school in southwest Sydney, where I grew up, and took a film crew with me with the help of the Department of Education. And I filmed about 30 young women between the ages of 8 and 17 and asked them a lot of questions about their ambitions and their journeys in the future. But one thing I asked them was what an entrepreneur is. And every single one of them that had some idea told me it was actually a man, and it was a man that ran a business. So that was the catalyst of change for me to launch Inspiring Redbirds. And, of course, now it's an enormous organisation around the world supporting thousands of women, and that support comes from both men and women. It's a great inclusive organisation through our mentor and education programs. And then, of course, I met a wonderful man called Dr. Richard Seymour from Sydney University Business School in my journey of building that organisation. And he was the head of entrepreneurship innovation at the business school there. And I was so enamoured by the work he was doing with women in Southeast Asia, including Burma, India, Indonesia and Vietnam. And he put 30,000 women through a program to teach them or to help them learn entrepreneurship. And I said, wow, this is pretty incredible pedagogy and learning. Why can't we do this in Australia? Why aren't we not doing this for our young people and our next generation of thinkers and change makers and movers? And so we co-developed a program called Startup.Business. And, of course, that business is still running and in every state and territory, in regional and rural schools right across Australia, helping young people learn how the mindset of an entrepreneur works and starting to build their own businesses while they're, in year 10, not when they're in their 30s like I was.
Yeah, fantastic. And I want to get into that a bit, but if we can just rewind for a minute. So we were speaking about your meeting in Melbourne with someone who became your business partner, mentor, the Muhammad Ali of entrepreneurship, I think was the phrase that you coined, which is great. So you said you had a business plan. So I'm interested. So it kind of sounds like you were MD for this business. You were thinking about something, but then you had the meeting that came to this. So how much of it was design? You were always going to do your thing, or was it a bit accidental as well? I'd be interested to know around, if you can speak to that a little bit, please.
It was very accidental. I think it happened because I met the right person at the right time. I did not go out seeking to start my own business. I never had a thought while I was working for somebody else that I would go and start a business. I never had that in the back of my mind. I speak to a lot of people that say, I'm happy working with you, but one day I'm going to own my own business, or one day I'm going to run my own business. I never had that thought. It was completely circumstantial. Yeah. And I think there was two parts of it that triggered me to have this conversation with this guy. And the first one was when I walked into the room. Remember in 2006, people were printing money on the stock market, and it was pre-GFC. So he was day trading on this whole bunch of screens in the office, very high energy person, very kinetic person, and very charismatic. And he asked me to take a seat at the table, anywhere I wanted to just take a seat. And I actually walked around to his side of the desk and I sat in his chair as a joke, right? And he laughed and I laughed, and that just set the tone for the whole meeting. So we didn't kind of start off doing that whole stranger meeting in business going, that small talky stuff. We kind of got straight into a funny conversation and straight into a very real conversation. he's sort of like, you've done some pretty amazing work where you are. Like, what are you going to do next? And I knew as I was at the top of the business, I couldn't go any further, and there was no equity on the table. So I had my reason for out, and it would have, the owners probably kicked themselves later that they didn't put that on the table, and they would have still had me there today, probably. Yeah. But I knew that I needed to go somewhere else. I had a very hungry mind to learn, a very, very curious person, and that has to be channeled somewhere. So when someone sits there and goes, well, if you were going to run your own business, what would you do? And I'm like, well, this is how I think I could make money. This is the resources I would need. He's like, okay, well, and like I said, this became a very long conversation. And it turned out that it was completely plausible and completely doable. And then I knew that with his infrastructure of people, because I was in what was then a managed service environment, which you probably, I think he was probably running the first co-working incubator space in Australia when I think and I look back how many years ago that happened. So there was other little startup businesses that were relying on his management services, which were, his accounting team, his finance team, his EA, his marketing, et cetera. So I would literally buy their time when I needed it. I never had employees for quite some time.
Did you do a lot of work around what success looked like for you? Because obviously...
Oh, yeah, definitely. So I had an investment of about $200,000, and that to me was a big deal. That I took that extremely seriously. And I said to my investor, business partner, whatever happens, whether I win or I lose, I will pay this money back to you. Yeah. And if that means I have to stack shelves in Coles at night in the freezer room, that's what I'll do. This is my integrity. This is how I operate. This is my sense of, my set of values that are talking here. And we literally had a handshake, and we did the paperwork later. Yeah. But then that became my goal. Like, I had to make sure I was going to pay that investor back. Yeah. And not only that, I wanted to pay it on a multiple, because as the business started to grow and I could see the potential that it had, the plan for me was to buy him out of the business at some point, but keep him on as a non-executive chairman of the company and keep him on as my mentor, because he had so many businesses on the go and such a huge portfolio of building assets and wealth. I was only a very, very small part of that. So my big goal was get to the top of Everest, pay him back, pay him a multiple on what the investment was to make sure it was a very fair investment, and keep him in my cage so that he would continue to support me.
And how did you balance with wanting to get to the top of Everest? Because I'm often asked, have we got an exit plan or where we want to go? And yeah, we've got a plan as a business. But I think if I look back 11 years ago when we started Granite, we were in a hurry, and you almost miss out on a lot of the journey. And people say you've really got to enjoy the journey. And I sort of learned to do that more and more over time. So how did you balance between, the pain of the climb with a view to getting on top of Everest?
I didn't, and that's the truth. And I was so relentless, David, and so focused. And the hours I worked were incredibly stupid. And I look back now and, there was things I just didn't have to do that I did. But I was married to this business. It was my husband. And I did everything I needed to do to make it well and healthy and to grow. And that meant sometimes, I was a little bit ruthless in the early days. I've since, I've very much changed how I operate. But that goal of winning and that goal of getting to the top was all I could see, and it's all I could smell. And, there's a term called chasing the hungry ghost, and it doesn't matter how successful people become, they still want more. And I was really at that place. And it was, I think because it was my first business, had a lot of naivety, but a massive amount of energy to put into it. And it's really hard to lose when you know the feeling of winning. And because I was winning and growing, although there was lots of mistakes being made and infrastructure would break from time to time and people would come and go and all that sort of human stuff that you have to deal with, it was in a really, really exciting place in my life. I chose to be single at that time in my life. I chose to be married to my business. I gave it everything it needed to be nourished. And in the process of that, I did burn out twice and ended up in not a very good place, and learned a couple of lessons out of that for sure. But, I've learned to pace now. How I operate and how I work and how I do things is far more structured and far more routine driven and far more time paced than ever before. And luckily now I get to be quite hands off on those businesses, and they're continuously running and growing. But I was relentless. There's no doubt about that.
And what advice can you give people who are maybe thinking about a business and they've got an idea, but it's not like their real inner calling, their passion, but it can still be a great business? So how do you balance between, at the end of the day, we all do best. Typically, we're more productive if we're doing something we enjoy doing. But how do you balance the fact that just some businesses you might be involved in aren't your real, say, calling, as opposed to, say, rare birds, for example? So how would you get that balance right?
Well, I think that question itself, one of the learnings that I have is that I could not drive or run a business that I was not passionate about. I have to be all in, 100%. You can't have your toe in the water and expect to succeed. You've got to get your boots on and jump in the deep end and go for it and swim as fast and as hard as you can. So I'm always a little bit perplexed about people that have side hustles, because I don't really get it. Yeah. I like the idea of all in. You're going to make this work. You've got to be prepared to give the next 10 years of your life to it if it's going to be successful. And you have to go wholly and truly into it. And the 3 businesses that I run now, I'm absolutely passionate about them. They have deep purpose. They change the lives of people that I may not even meet. And 2 of them are legacy businesses. So otherwise, I'm kind of not a person that can just sell widgets on the side and feel good about it because it just makes money.
So if we can start to talk a bit about gender diversity. So you mentioned about some of the programs that you'd seen run overseas, and then you brought them back to Australia, and you mentioned about, going into your old school and people saying an entrepreneur is typically a man. So do you think now the path to entrepreneurship is still different from a male and female perspective?
Oh, no, I think it's much easier for women now. I think that, when I started that business to Rare Birds, it was in 2015, and I'd been a part of it was just when Turnbull had become Prime Minister, and before he released the innovation paper, he put a bunch of people in a room and we all had a discussion about what entrepreneurship and innovation needs to look like in Australia. And I think he really took big leaps and bounds for Australia in that space. I mean, before that, innovation entrepreneurship was not being talked at the breakfast table, and now it absolutely is. And so when I was at that round table, I talked specifically about women, about the value that they create, not just in business, but for their families and for their communities and for the greater GDP of the countries that they live in. So just to give you a very strange fact, in the Western developed world, female entrepreneurs reinvest 90 cents of every dollar that they make of profit back into community, family, and education, health services of those things, and men reinvest 40 cents in every dollar. So the more women we have in this space, no one loses. No one can lose, because the economic domino effect of that is undeniable. And when you have women who are financially secure and financially independent because they're running their own businesses, it also alleviates our social system. So it removes them from domestic violence situations. It removes them from mental abuse situations, because as soon as they become financially independent, they have freedom and they have choice. Not only that, we also, there's data that you can see from MIT or from Harvard, wherever you want to look at. The data says that if you put women into positions of leadership, whether it's in companies, whether it's in ASX-listed businesses, private businesses, and you have the balance right, those businesses become more profitable. And that's because you have to have perspective of thinking and perspective of solution making when you're looking at problems for the organisation.
Do you think now there's going to be a real push, and as we move into 2021, it could be, a really great time to further promote, entrepreneurship for everyone, but from a female entrepreneur point of view, after such a tough year for everyone, but, really move that forwards?
I think it's for everybody. And I think that we have, in Australia, our population to men and women is pretty even. So everyone should be involved in entrepreneurship if that's their calling. If you think about companies like Airbnb, Uber, and some of those great businesses that scale, they all have their problems. Don't get me wrong. You could have a whole conversation about the politics of those businesses, but they all started in the GFC. So what happens is that when a person or a country or a region is under great adversity, that's where people are forced to innovate. Now, a country that does that naturally is Israel, and it's one of the most entrepreneurial countries on the planet. And it's because they've lived under adversity, and you have to continuously problem solve and come up with solutions to change that adverse environment. Yeah. Australia has been very comfortable and very lucky for a long time. We really, other than COVID, and I know there's lots of businesses that have shut down, and I really feel bad for them, but lots of other businesses are actually thriving because of this adversity. For example, a friend of mine has a transport business who it's going bananas because more people are buying stuff online and having to have it delivered. And so the transport infrastructure industry is booming. Yeah. Another friend of mine has advisors on retail, and their online stores are doing 7 or 8 times what they were doing previously without the overhead cost of bricks and mortar business. So there's opportunities for everyone if you want to see them. And I think during these sort of pandemic times, that's when you should have that growth mindset lens on. And if what you're doing isn't working and you need to throw it out, that's not a shameful thing. It's not a failure because this is forced on us. This is not something we chose to do. But there is new opportunities if you have that right mindset.
So if starting your own thing outside of a current business isn't for you, can you speak a bit around being an entrepreneur in an existing business and how you can impact and perhaps build an entrepreneurial culture? Because we'll have people on, attending in the audience today. Some of them are working, doing their own thing. Some of them have got leadership roles in big businesses, but maybe want to add an extra element of creativity to that business.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things to overcome first. And like we were talking about, this growth mindset, you have to have a way of thinking that enables you to see opportunity and possibility. Within the businesses that I have, my biggest role is to create a vision and then allow amazing people to help me execute that vision. So I can generally see a few years ahead of my game where I want the organisation to be and what I want it to be doing. And then I have to give the individuals in that organisation the confidence and the self-belief that they're invited on that journey with me, and I want them on that journey with me, and they're valuable in that journey with me. Yep. So I often, from a success perspective, I like to push the praise back to my team. I'm not great at taking that on myself. Yep. But then I have to be a person that walks the talk and that also learns in action. So if I make a mistake, I always put my hand up and say, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. And I just need to work out how we do this differently. So that level of arrogance and ego, you need a bit of ego as an entrepreneur, but I think a high level of arrogance or ego or a sense of very rigid structure doesn't work. So I'm very fluid in my thinking. I'm very quick with my decision making, although that's become a practice over a period of time. And I really value the human beings that follow me in the journey. Now, I always say to them, I'll walk in front of you to protect you, I'll walk beside you as my peer, and I'll walk behind you to promote you and push you forward. And it's also my role to get them to be uncomfortable. I have to have people around me that are very comfortable with change, and no matter what that change could be, because opportunities come and we might need to remobilise or build a different business model, or we might have to think about how we can make money out of something that's come up, and that has to happen pretty quickly. So having people that are open to change and that can be their own agency of change as an individual also has to be encouraged. So there's not really any room in the business for people that have an inflexible mindset or a stable or a set mind. They do have to be able to see what I'm thinking, and I once I articulate that, help me turn it into execution, and then of course we measure everything.
So what's your views around, the balance between hiring for a skill set and hiring for the human, really? So how do you manage that balance?
I'd say it's 80% human, 20% skill set, but that's in my business. I know other businesses that are very focused on skill set because of very particular or niche needs that they have. Yep. But if you can connect with our values, be a good human, be a kind and a good human in general. Yep. And if you can do your job really well and be prepared and open to learning and improving, then they're probably the things I look for. I'm usually the last person in the line to hire, so my the leaders in each of those businesses will do the hiring, and I really just do the last sign off on it. I'll meet the person, and because I'm not the one working with that new person every day, it's that team leader or it's that general manager or that manager. So I let them make their own hiring decisions, and unless I just get a really terrible feeling or a bad gut feeling about the person, I'll let them carry on with that process.
And as a leader, because there's a lot of leaders on this call this morning, how do you make up for the fact that we're having less anecdotal conversations this year? Because typically people don't book a Zoom for 2 minutes, but you're missing some of the corridor conversations or some of the tea and coffee type catch-ups. So how have you gone about? I mean, I know you've been working in a different way for many years, but so maybe you can share some of how you get those anecdotal conversations going and really get across the heart and soul of the business on a daily basis.
I think at first with remote working, it was all a very new experience for people to be on video, and not everyone's comfortable in that environment. There's introverts are not that comfortable in that environment, and extroverts are very comfortable. But I think giving people permission to have ideas and to share them liberally. And so at each of the meetings that we have weekly, there's a space that's created for new ideas. And it's just a general conversation about anything anyone wants to talk about that could improve or change or create opportunity in the business as it stands. And often if you provide that space and that room for people to talk, great conversations come out. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing like sitting together face to face and having lunch together and just talking. And in general, I'll be talking about their families or their next holidays. And, these conversations move into business conversations that can, determine or, find new opportunity. I just don't think remote can really replace that, to be really fair and honest. I think the more we have, our basic need as a human is connection. And I think the more that we have face-to-face, the better. I know that we're having a great conversation now, but I know if we were together, in the room together, face-to-face, you would feel a different vibe. You would feel a different energy, and you would probably be stimulated in a different way to ask, different questions, or different ideas might come into your head. So I don't know if that can be replaced online.
Just briefly, and we've got quite a lot of questions coming through now, which is great. So please feel free to fire through. Growth mindset versus fixed mindset. Could you talk to that for a couple of minutes? Yes.
So the growth mindset is obviously opposite to a fixed mindset. And people with a fixed mindset believe that their talent and ability is at a certain level and it can't be altered. And because of this, it creates fear. and generally a fear of failure as well. And this is because they believe that failure reflects poorly on their abilities and themselves personally. And therefore, they really don't push outside of their comfort zone or challenge themselves or want to grow. And I know lots of people like that, and it doesn't mean everyone has to have a growth mindset, but as an entrepreneur, you absolutely do. And in a business, as a business leader, you have to have one as well. And people with a growth mindset are I think they're far more resilient, and they believe that talent and ability can be increased with extra effort. And they tend to relish in challenges. They tend to relish in the opportunity to grow. And they don't, in fact, have a perception of failure. They have a perception of continuous, lifelong learning.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the good news is that mindset can be changed, but it's an absolute choice. Like the only person that I can talk about it all day, right? But the only person that can do it is yourself. And if you see and believe that your success comes from persistence and effort and determination and further training, then you and your business will have the ability to grow. It's also, I think it's about backing yourself as well. It's got a lot to do with your self-belief and that you are valid in the environment that you're in, and your opinions are valid, and that your thinking is valid. And I always think that, you know, when we talk about failure and a growth mindset, I've failed so many times, it's not funny, right? But that could be, I've lost legal cases, I've had fraud in my businesses, I've hired rogue employees, I've had some terrible customers along the way. And, you know, these are all things that you can probably relate to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that all, to me, all those things are probably going to happen at some point if you have longevity in business.
Yeah.
So I look at them individually and go, oh, my God, I'm such a failure because that happened to me. I look at it and go, what do I need to learn from that? What was wrong in our process? What do I need to change? Who's the right person to lead that with me? And how am I going to go about fixing it? And that's continuous learning. I certainly don't bash myself up and go, oh, you're such an idiot, you made that mistake. If I made the same mistake twice, then I would beat myself up a bit.
Yeah, so, concepts of failure is data, right?
It is absolutely data. And with that growth mindset, you're able to look objectively at what could have been done better and how you can achieve those desired outcomes. It's not a personal failure, but it's usually a failure of some sort of process. And that's something that can be improved through experimenting or training or collaboration. But the point is you've got to learn, and you've got to adapt, and you've got to continuously grow. Like, there's no point making a mistake and then going home, beating yourself up, sitting and rocking backwards forward in the corner saying, you know, I'm a total failure, because that doesn't solve anything. And, you know, even in my past, I probably did that a couple of times, to be honest. And my mentor, who was my business partner, would ring me and say, you go, get up. We've got a business to run here. We've got to go.
Yeah. Amazing. Jo, it's been a pleasure to speak with you this morning. I'd encourage you all to connect with Jo on LinkedIn if you want to. I know there's other questions coming through. So thank you, everyone, for this morning's. Hopefully it was a useful discussion. Jo, thanks again. I know you're very busy, so we really appreciate your time. Ladies and gentlemen, go Burston.